Okay, so um, episode 1. What color was Adam? Adam was black. Well, we're going to prove it as we go. We're going to give evidence and we're going to give proof. All right. So the first part is biblical evidence. We started it last video. I'm gonna complete it this video. When I say complete, I just mean I'm gonna stop. And so and then go on to part 2, demographical evidence. Part 3, paleontological evidence. Part 4, forensic evidence. Evidence from the scientific community in part 5. Technical evidence, part 6. In part 6, that's also where we're going to talk about who goes to heaven. So if the church was black, as we saw in the book of Songs of Solomon, does that mean white people don't go to heaven? The answer to that is yes. White people do not go to heaven, and that answer sounds blasphemous, but it's true, and so we'll explain it, what we mean, when we get to technical evidence. Then we go to genetic evidence and genetic proof of the fact that Adam is black. And then by the time we get here, we'll know for a fact that Adam and Eve were black, beyond the shadow of a doubt. Then we go to episode 2, where we talk about where was Eden. And yes, we know exactly where Eden was. I mean, we know where Eden was. And so when we get there, we'll deal with that. But today we're dealing with biblical evidence, some more biblical evidence of the fact that Adam was a black man. And so Adam was made in God's image. In Genesis 1 verse 27, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. This is the word image that's being used here. Tselem, T-S-L-M. Vowels are the dots. Hebrew reads that way, from right to left, opposite of English. And so that's the word tselem. It's an image. It's like the fingerprints in the dirt. Okay. So Adam was made in the image of God. What does that mean? So first of all, we're proving and we're we're proclaiming that Adam was black, and that means that black history is world history, because the first man was Adam. History is the study of our past. When we go down to our past, we end up with a black family, and there were no white people there. It was just Adam and Eve, and God said it was good. And so Adam's family looked like the house of pain, and his kids were also black. You know, just like if you have kids and you're black, your kids are going to be black. You know, I had a kid 6 years ago, and lo and behold, he was black. So that's normal. So Adam was and Eve were black, so their kids were black. So history started off with a black family, and in this video, I'm going to prove that the word image is a physical word. It's not just a spiritual word, but it's functional and physical. And it's a very physical word, the word image. Contrary to what white theology would tell you, and it is white theology, that when it comes to the image, they say that it doesn't have anything to do with the physicality of Adam, but it has to do with the spirituality of Adam. And they say, what do you mean to be in the image of God? It is, because, God is a spirit. You have a spirit. God is a moral being. You are a moral being. That's what separates you from animals. And that's pretty much what they argue. But it's incorrect. Okay? The word image is a physical word. Okay? Every kingdom has a king that looks like them. The kingdom of God doesn't have a king who looks like a foreigner. The kingdom of God also has a king that looks like the people that he made. If you go to China, the Chinese leaders look Chinese. If you go to Africa, for the most part, the African leaders look African. You go to Spanish places, they look Spanish, etc. So the word image is a physical word. All right, now, obviously, well, before I get to the objection, do a quick review. Songs of Solomon 1 verse 5 says the wife of Solomon, who is a picture of the wife of Christ, the church, says, I am black and beautiful. So the church basically said in this verse, I am black and beautiful. From a figurative point of view, the wife of Jesus is saying, I am black and beautiful. The church is saying, I am black and beautiful. And then you go to Solomon 5:10. Solomon, who is a picture of Christ. Solomon means peace. Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He's a picture of Christ in typology. And Solomon says, my lover, the wife says of Solomon, my lover is dark and dazzling, better than 10,000 others. So now this is a description of Solomon, who is a description of Jesus. And basically this verse is telling us about Jesus that he is dark and dazzling. That's what this is implying about Jesus from a figurative point of view, which is the typological meaning of this verse. It's a reference to Jesus. Okay, the book of Songs of Solomon is a story about Jesus in the church. All right, symbolically represented by the love of Solomon and his wife. And so, but the meaning is not just because the Bible is not trying to just tell us a love story about somebody. It's not a soap opera. It's about Jesus loving his wife and his wife loving Jesus. And the wife is black and beautiful and Jesus is dark and dazzling. Okay, so then also Samuel 16:12, we read about David that he was dark, handsome, beautiful eyes. This is the one. He was the one that was anointed. He was an anointed one because he's a picture of Jesus, who is the ultimate anointed one. That's why he's named Christ. Christ means the anointed one. Anoint means to add ointment or oil to make you symbolically holy, like being covered in the Holy Spirit. But Jesus is actually holy. That's why he's called the Christ. David killed Goliath. Jesus died in Golgotha. So David ended the kingdom of the Philistines. Jesus, when he died on the cross, destroyed the kingdom of Satan. David is a picture of Christ, and David is dark. And then again, in chapter 17:42, David had a dark, healthy complexion and was handsome, which means that he looked like Bodhi. No, I'm just kidding. But the fact that he was dark and handsome has implications. They used a dark person to be a type of Christ, to be a foreshadowing of Christ. All right. So and then what does that have to do with Adam? Well, Jesus was the last Adam. Corinthians 15:45. Christ, the last Adam. So that means all of these pictures of Christ can also be inferred or applied as evidence towards the blackness of Adam. They definitely don't add up to the whiteness of Adam. Oh, David was dark. Oh, that means Adam was white. No, that doesn't work. I am black and beautiful. Okay, maybe his wife is white. No, that doesn't work. My lover is dark and dazzling. Oh, Adam's white. No, that doesn't work. It adds evidence to the blackness of Adam, and that's all we're doing so far. Now, back to the fact that the image is a physical word. In white theology, they'd argue that God is spirit, and because God is spirit, which the Bible clearly says he is spirit in John chapter 4 verse 24, then that means the word image is not physical, because it's just spiritual. God is a spirit, so he doesn't have a body. So when he makes Adam with a body, that body doesn't have anything to do with God, according to them. And then also, in Luke 24 verse 39, it says Jesus, when he comes back from the tomb, he sees his disciples and they're like, wait a minute, is this a ghost? This can't be Jesus. We just saw you get killed. And then Jesus, we just saw you get murdered, really. And Jesus says, no, it's me, handle me. See, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have. So Jesus, after the resurrection, had flesh and bones, which means that, he still maintained a physical body, even though he was in his resurrected body. So that's also evidence towards the fact that heaven is a physical place. And that's why Jesus had a physical body. But this verse says a spirit does not have flesh and bones. And so when they say God is spirit, he doesn't have flesh and bones. So therefore, when he made Adam in his image, the flesh and bones that Adam had nothing to do with God. That's their conclusion, but the conclusion is false. Okay? So the Lord has made everything for his purpose. So when you look at the skin of Adam, the Bible tells us that everything has a purpose. So, but what we learn in white theology basically tells us that the skin has no purpose. It's just random. God made him black. It was just random. He could have made him purple. There was no purpose to the color. God has not made everything for a purpose, basically, is what they're saying. But that's going to be proven wrong in this Bible study. The Lord has made everything for his purpose. It's Proverbs 16:4. And then verse 33 says, we may throw the dice, but the Lord determines how they fall. You may throw a dice. That's like a random activity, right? When you throw dice, it seems random, but the Lord determines how they fall, which means that it's not random. It's determined. And so God in this verse is telling us that things are not random. So that if you apply that to the skin color of Adam, it means that the choice of brown or black was not a random choice. Jesus said in Matthew 10:29, sparrows, which are birds that can be bought 2 for a penny back then, he says, not one of them falls to the ground apart from the Father's will, which means that it's not random. You look at the birds and they come down, and you think, oh, it's just random. They came down, they're going up. And Jesus said, nope, that's not random. It's by design. It falls under the realm of God's sovereignty. And so every white theologian, whether they're a Calvinist or Arminian, believe in the complete sovereignty of God. But when it comes to the skin color, all of a sudden that's random. You see? So, like I said, as we look at other things in this video, we're gonna see that the image is not random. It's a very precise, purposeful word, and it's a very physical word. Okay. So this is the word for image here, engraved on in the mind of God, showing that God, who in his perfection, knows everything that he's going to do before he does it. And in his perfect state of mind, he decided to use the word image in creating Adam. And to put it in context, the word image is a word that Moses was very familiar with, because Moses lived in Egypt. Moses lived in Africa. Egypt was the place where, compared to every other empire of the ancient times, there was no other empire that had more images of false gods. There was no other empire. It was the land of the image. Okay? They had the most temples to false gods. They built pyramids for their pharaohs and their false gods. And the pharaohs thought they were gods. And they built the most statues to false gods. They engraved their images on their temples to the false gods. Egypt was infested with images of false gods. Infestation. Okay? And God knew that Moses lived in the most idolatrous empire of the ancient times. Idols, engravements, statues, temples, pyramids, images of false gods everywhere. Yet God said to Moses, knowing the context of Moses, knowing that all of these images are in his head, God says to Moses, hey, I created man in my image. In the image of God, he created him. And so God knows how that word image is going to fall into the mind of Moses. He knows the context that this word image is going to fall into. A context where a man lives in Egypt, where there is the highest infestation of images to false gods. And all of those false gods looked like their sources. In Egypt, if you thought the grass was God, you'd make an image of a green god that looked like green grass. If you thought the Nile River was a god, which they did, then they would make an image that looked like a blue false god because the river was blue. So if you thought a frog was God, which they did, you'd make a god that looked like a frog. And so all of their images looked like the source. And so when God tells Moses, hey, I made Adam in my image, Moses is like, okay, so that means Adam looks like you. All right, so that's just a given in how the context, based off of the context, that's a given in how Moses was going to react to God's revelation. So the 10 plagues of Egypt. Egypt had so many gods, so when God went to drop the plagues on them, the plagues were basically attacking the gods of Egypt. So, for example, in the first plague, Exodus 7 verse 20, the whole Nile River turned to blood. So why did God attack the Nile River? Is because they had a god that was named Happy that represented the spirit of the Nile. So God showed them that Happy was a false god by turning the river into blood. And then so everybody got the blues, and Happy wasn't happy anymore. All right? But the point is that Happy looked like the Nile River. That's why he's depicted as being blue. All right? Exodus 8 verse 6. Aaron raised his hand over the waters, and the frogs came up and covered the whole land. God was attacking their frog god. Heketh also lived in the Nile, and therefore was blue-bodied with a frog head. You see? So he's a blue frog. Kermit frog? Okay, well, anyways, he's a blue frog. And a frog head, blue-bodied. And blue because of the Nile River. All right? So again, the image looks like the source. The image looks like the source. All right. And next, you have the plague of gnats, and Aaron raised his hand and struck the ground, and the gnats infested the land. All the dust in the land turned into gnats. And then Pharaoh said, that's not good. So Pharaoh's magicians tried to do the same thing with their secret arts, but their secret farts didn't work. So then they were like, we quit. No, I'm just kidding. But the gnats covered everyone, people and animals alike. This is the finger of God. The finger of God is a phrase that we see when God is writing the Ten Commandments, and it's a phrase that we see when God is writing on the dirt when the lady was caught in adultery. But this is the finger of God when in reference to the dust plague, the plague of gnats, where the dust turned into gnats. And this was against the god Geb, which is the earth god of their time. So earth is full of grass, vegetation, plants. That's why their god was green. But then he was also brown. He was depicted with the colors green, brown, and black. And so the black and brown represented the soil of the earth, because he's an earth god. So he's green like the vegetation on the earth, but he's also depicted with brown because of the soil, and the black because in the Nile River the soil was rich, and the richest soil is black soil. Now some people say, well, what color dirt or soil did God use to make Adam? Well, if he wanted to use the best soil, it would have been black soil. If the skin had any relationship, it would have been black, because the best soil that there is when it comes to fertility is black. You could just Google it. That's a simple Google. What color is the best soil? Dark brown or black? All right. It's a sign of organic content, abundant humus, active microbial life, high fertility, better water retention. Okay. Dark soil is the gold standard. All right. So when the color is dark, the color is best. And so when you have other colors like red, that's a little bit lower down in the spectrum. All right. So it's good for drainage, it's good for certain things, but it's not as good as the dark and the brown. And then the light brown gets even a little bit worse. All right. And so and then you go down to gray. Now you get to gray green. It gets a little bit worse. These are in order from best to worst. And then finally, the worst type of soil is white soil. White or pale. Very light soil can indicate nutrients have been leached out, often due to high sand content and excessive rainfall. Leached out. No nutrients left. So it's similar to skin. You know, you start off with rich melanin skin. You have dark brown skin full of genetic diversity. It can produce all forms of life. But then as you lose genetic diversity and the nutrients of your skin color, your skin gets lighter and lighter until you eventually become a white person who lacks melanin and lack genetic diversity that you find in the black skin. All right. So it's the same as the dirt. And so this God was depicting that with the brown and the black and brown colors that he had on, in the black and brown of his skin and hair, and the green depicted the vegetation. The next plague, Exodus chapter 8, verse 24, flies filled Pharaoh's palace and the houses of his officials. The whole land of Egypt was thrown into chaos by the flies. And the flies represent judgments against the Achet god, the fly god, and the dung beetle god, Capri, the dung beetle god, who looked like a dung beetle. You see, the dung beetle god, his face was a dung beetle. All right. And then the god Achet, the fly god, looked like a fly mixed with a snake. And he had green because it was also a god that protected the Nile River. And so the Nile was blue. And I'm sorry, I said green, blue, because he was connected to the water and the vegetation around the Nile River. but he was also the fly god because the lower part of the Nile River that he was supposedly protecting was also infested with insects and flies and all kinds of insects. And so these were the gods of those insects. And so when God sent the plague of flies, he basically was showing that he was the one that was in charge. The other plague in Exodus 9 verse 6, the livestock, all the cows, all the cattle died. And so the god of the cows, or the cattle god, Hathor, this guy was their image. This was the image of the cattle god, the cow god. And they thought he was a cow, so they thought, he was a holy cow. And but in reality, he was just a holy something else, right? Like a dung beetle, maybe. And so this cow looks like a cow. And so Moses, living in this environment of Egypt, seeing all their false images, also he knew that every image of their false god had looked like the source. So they thought the cows were God, and so they made an image that looked like a cow. And so now God tells Moses, hey, I made an image too. His name is Adam, and he's in my likeness. But then people say, oh, no, he doesn't look like God. He just has the Spirit of God in him. But he doesn't look like God. Only the Spirit of God is in him. All right, so now let's look at the word image in the New Testament, and then we're going to look at it in the Old Testament to see what it really means and how it's used. So in Hebrews 1 verse 3, we're just going to look at a few verses, probably 4 verses, and that's it. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. So the word image here is translated exact representation. And that word image is describing Jesus and when he was on earth, and saying that Jesus was basically the exact representation of God, of God's being. And in NLT, it says the very character of God's being. This is where some people get it wrong. They hear character, they're like, it's talking about morality. It's talking about his soul, his spirit, his joy, his love. No, it's talking about his physical behavior that comes from the invisible attributes of his soul, his morality, and this and that. The physical actions that he lives out in the physical world. Because if you don't have a physical body, you can't interact with the physical world. So we have a soul, and the soul is invisible, but the soul animates our body in a physical world, and we live out a physical experience, and the way we live is in the physical realm is our character. So example is like a movie. The author of a movie wants to create a Superman, right? Or he wants to create a Spider-Man. And then he says, you know what? I want this guy to be able to leap and bound like a spider and use his webs and this and that. That's my idea. Now that he has his idea, he has to get a real character, a physical character, that's actually going to implement the ideas of the author. Okay? And that's the character. So the character is the physical representation of the ideas of the author. And so that's how character is being used here. So, and that's why in ESV it says exact imprint. An imprint is like a footprint. It's something visible that can be seen and touched. It's physical. And then it says the express image. Now we get the word image. So we know, okay, this is another word for image in the Bible. The very image, the exact likeness. So people say Jesus, he was a representation of God's moral character, but his skin didn't look nothing, it had nothing to do with how God looks. While this verse says it's the very image or the exact likeness, so they're saying not exactly. You see, so but this verse says he's the figure of God's being. This translation says like him in every way. But then some people say like him in every way except the skin. Well, then why did you say every way? So, but Jesus was like the Spirit of God in every way. In every way. So that means if God was a spirit that wanted to step into the three-dimensional world that we live in, he would look exactly like Jesus when he did. Or if he wanted to step into our world in the book of Genesis, he would look exactly like Adam. So Adam is how the Spirit of God looks in our world. Jesus is how God looks in our world. Okay? And so there's physical implications of that. All right? So now in Matthew chapter 22 verse 19, Jesus is talking about the word image. They try to trap Jesus. They say, hey, Jesus, should we pay taxes to Caesar, or are you our king? And should we pay taxes to you and only you and not Caesar? And then Jesus knew they're trying to trap him. He said, let me see the coin. Let me see the denarius. And it says, whose image is on this coin? Whose image is this? Whose inscription? Caesar's, they reply. Little Caesar's. Because they were hungry. No, I'm just kidding. And so he said, so give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and give God what is God's. Here's Caesar, and Caesar looks like the coin that has his picture on it. His image is on the coin. All right? You see the nose? Look at that nose. Look at that chin. That joker had a chin on him. But the bottom line is, this coin looked like him. He was the person. This was the image. And the image looked like Caesar. And so God said, okay, look, you see the image of the coin? Give Caesar back what is Caesar's. Give the coin to Caesar. And give your life to God, because you are made in the image of God. So like the coin is the image of Caesar, and it looks like Caesar. You are the image of God and you look like God. So give the coins to Caesar, give your life to God. And the word image that is used here is the word icon. Icon is where we get our word icon from. So an icon is something that you can press, for example, and it looks like what you want, and it also gives you the thing that it looks like. So it's kind of like in a computer. If you see a picture of a printer, you click on that and then it prints your paper. So it looks like a printer, but it also has the power in it to print. All right? So it's just like a icon of a happy face. If I give you this, if I send this icon to you and I say, you know, I'm so angry right now, and then I'm so angry with you, and then I send you this icon, you're going to say something's wrong, because the icon doesn't match the emotion. It doesn't match the invisible mindset that I have. So if my mindset is happy, the icon is going to match that mindset. So it's the same idea like with Cain. When Cain was angry because he gave the wrong sacrifice, God said, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? Why do you have a frown on your face? He said, if you do right, will you not be accepted? So in other words, when you have a frown, the frown is an image of injustice. And so God is saying, if you did right, you would be accepted. So if I didn't accept you, if you did something right and I didn't accept you, then that would be unjust. And the way to express that would be through the image of a frown on your face. But if there was no injustice done, there should not be the image of a frown on your face, because it does not match the invisible emotion that somebody feels when they receive injustice. So God understands how to match an image to an invisible reality. And so that is ramification for the image that he created when he created Adam. That means when he created Adam, he understood that images match the invisible realities. God knows that the image on your face should reflect the invisible reality that you want to express. And so he's going to be consistent with himself when he creates Adam and Eve. Colossians 1:15, the word image again, he is, speaking of Jesus, Jesus is the exact living image, the essential manifestation. So that means if God wanted to be physical, this is how he would look. There's all the essential components of how God would look in the physical realm are in Jesus. So he says the exact living image, essential manifestation of unseen God, the visible representation of the invisible. So basically that verse is saying, listen, if God is living outside of three-dimensional realm, he lives where our thoughts are. Our thoughts are invisible. How does he express himself precisely? He creates an image that is very precise so that that image can represent him precisely. Okay, and then that's what we see in the book of in Genesis with Adam and Eve, and we see it with Jesus. Okay, so now we go to the Old Testament, back to the verse Genesis 1:27. He created man in his own image. The word image there is tselem in Hebrew, and this word is the word that proves that the word image is a physical word. Okay, so tselem, Hebrew, remember, is read from right to left, is the opposite of English, read from left to right in English. Hebrew is from right to left. So the first letter is here, TS is a TS sound, Tesade. And then this is Lamed, and this is Mem. Tselem. Tselem. All right. And so these dots are the vowel sounds. All right. But so Hebrew letters have meaning. Every letter in Hebrew has multi-dimensional meanings. Okay. So the Hebrew letter is a letter. Actually, the word letter in Hebrew means a sign. So every alphabet in Hebrew is a sign. Okay? And so when you put the alphabets together, you put multiple signs together, they give you other signs. All right? And so the word it's one thing to be able to read the word and say, oh, tselem, that means image. That's one meaning of the word. But then each letter has another meaning that they add to the word. And then each letter has numbers. And the numbers, numerical value, have meaning in Hebrew. And then it has pictographs. So it has pictures for every letter. So every letter in Hebrew has a pictographic meaning. And so when God speaks through the Old Testament in Hebrew, he is speaking through to us in a multidimensional way. So his words are saying many things at once. Okay? So now when we look at this word tselem, we're going to look at just the pictographic meaning of the word. And from that, we're going to know that the word is also a very physical word. So in the Hebrew alphabet, like for example, you have the letter A. In Hebrew, it's Aleph. This is it right here. In Aleph, the picture that matches up with the word Aleph is a picture of an ox. And as we know, an ox is one of the sacrificial animals in the temple. When the priests would sin, one of the sacrifices that they had to offer was an ox in their behalf. And all of the sacrifices were pictures of Christ dying on our behalf. And so the ox was a picture of Christ dying on our behalf, or on the behalf of the priests when they sinned. And so the aleph represents an ox. So aleph can represent a sacrificial aspect of God. And then the meaning, the Hebrew meaning of the word aleph, the letter aleph, is God. Okay? So aleph also stands for God. It's also the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. You see? It also has a numeric value of 1. So those are all things you keep in mind when you're reading the words to see what God is trying to say. All right. So now back to the word image. The first letter of the word image is tashade, is green, so I highlighted it here in green. And the picture, so I'm only looking at the picture meaning today. I'm not looking at all the other meanings. So the picture meaning is a picture of a man lying down. That's his head. That circle is his head, and that's his feet. And so he's lying down. So you have a picture of a man. That's the first letter, tashade, of the word image. The second letter is lamed, yellow. Go to the yellow highlight. It's a picture of a staff. Okay? It's a picture of a staff. So the second letter looks like a staff. And it's a picture of a staff. So the picture meaning of this letter L, lamed, is a staff. So you have a man and you have a staff. The red, let's go to the red highlight, mem, that's a picture of water. This is a picture of water. The pictorial meaning of this letter is water. So now you have a man with a staff with some water. So now we have a problem, because this word image is a picture of a man with a staff and some water. That sounds a lot like Moses. But we're talking about Adam, because that's the word that God says Adam was made in his image. But now we're talking about Moses, and Moses is the one that wrote this. God gave Moses the book of Genesis, and Moses is writing about Adam, but the word about Adam, image, is talking about him. That's the way God's word is. You see, so Moses' name was similar in Hebrew to the name Masha, because his name was Moshe. And as you can see, the letters for Moses here are the same consonants for Moshe. And the word Moshe is water. And Moshe, Masha, Moshe, Moses, his name meant drawn out of water. They called him that because he was drawn out of the water. And so his name has to do with water. And Moses was a man with a staff. That's a physical word. Staff is a physical thing. Water is a physical thing. The word image, this is the word image, is a physical word. It literally means a man with a staff with some water. Those are 3 physical objects. And a man with a staff and water, that's Moses. Moses was the man with a staff who split the water in half. Moses was a man with a staff who hit the rock in his wrath. So the word image, who is supposed to be referring to when God created Adam in his image, is also referring to Moses, the man with the staff who split the water in half. So Moses is like, wait a minute, God, are you talking about me and Adam at the same time? That's multidimensional. And that's exactly correct. One word used to tie Moses to Adam, Adam to God, and God to Moses. So Moses means, the word image means the man with the staff that split the water in half. When Moses left Goshen, all they had to do was go straight and they would be in Israel. But instead, they went straight, they turned down here, and they got trapped right in front of the Red Sea, at this portion of the Red Sea. And they trapped themselves because there's a bunch of mountains in back of them. They couldn't just run sideways. They were really trapped here. And so Pharaoh thought they didn't know what they were doing, according to Exodus. Because Pharaoh knew. Why didn't they just go straight? So then Pharaoh's like, wait, they're lost. They don't know where they're going. Look at them. They turned here, and then now they're trapped by the Red Sea. Let's go get them. But this was all because of the word image. Because God predicted before Moses was born that when he made Adam in his image, that there would also be a man with a staff that would split this water in half. You see? And so God now leads them to the water and basically causes them to experience the splitting of the Red Sea. And so as they come down through this mountain and they get to the place that's known as Nueva today, this land right here, they're trapped. They can't go back because Pharaoh's coming this way, and there's no other way for them to go. They're engulfed in this mountain. So God blows the east wind through here, and it reveals what can be seen today by satellite. This is a satellite image of the area where we pretty much believe that the Red Sea was split in half, because this is the same place that when they look underneath, they see reefs that look like chariot wheels. But also, right under the water, as you can see, when the wind blow the water out of the way, there's a land, not a land bridge, but it's a plateau of land that's high enough for them to travel on it, and then go right back up, and it's not too high, it's not too steep. And so this is a perfect place where where Moses was able to split the sea, and all of the Israelites were able to walk down and walk back up. And then when Pharaoh them finally came down, they went down, and then God stopped the wind from blowing. And according to science, the wind only had to be going over 65 miles per hour. It will split the Red Sea in this region. And then once that wind stopped blowing, all the water would come back. And it was about, I think, 900 feet. Don't quote me on that one. But then they would drown. And so all of this was predicted in the book of Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, where God said he made man in his image, because the word image has to do with a man and a staff and some water. Those are three physical things. And that word image links Adam to Moses. Adam in the image of God, also in the image of Moses. Moses, the African, in the image of God. The same word that ties Moses to God ties God to Adam and implies the connection between Adam and Moses. Two Africans in the image of God, two Edenites, two black Edenites in the image of God. Evidence, proof coming. Two black Edenites in the image of God. And we say Edenites because Africa was a white man term. The white colonial people came up with the name Africa, right? But the essential part is that it was a land of blacks, and it was, God called it Eden. During the time of Moses was living in the Egyptian Empire, the new Egyptian Empire. You can just Google that and you'll see that he was living during the time of the new Egyptian Empire. And at that time, Israel was also part of Egypt, which means that Israel was part of Africa. And but in reality, this region was Eden. That was the first name God gave to the earth. And it was Eden was a black place, right? Adam and Eve, black, all the way up to Moses, black, African, in the image of God. And God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good. And at the time, there were no white people. But God still looked at everything that he made and said it was very good. You think about that. Amen.